Okay, ready for a deep dive? This time, we're heading north. Way north. Finland.
To the land of, what is it? Reindeer and saunas, of course. But we're here for something a little more, well, powerful.
You got it, we're talking GN laws. But trust me, this isn't the usual back and forth. Finland. They've got this whole different thing going on.
Exactly. It's a system that kind of throws you off, especially when you think about who their next door neighbor is.
Russia, right. Talk about a country with some, shall we say, motivation to be armed.
Exactly. But here's the thing. Finland's got this high rate of gun ownership, but their gun violence, remarkably low.
See, that's what throws me. Here we are always debating,
Mm.
but they've somehow found like a middle ground.
It's fascinating, right? It really challenges a lot of the assumptions we tend to have, especially, well, us here in the States.
Okay, so first things first, when I was reading up on this, I was blown away by how much Finland trusts its citizens with guns.
It's ingrained in their culture. Hunting, for instance. It's practically a national sport over there.
Yeah, I saw that, like way more common than here.
Absolutely. And then there's the mandatory military service for most men. We're talking intense firearms training, not just for a few weeks. This is serious stuff.
So not just how to shoot, but like the whole 9 yards.
Oh, way more than that. Think. Safe handling, storage, responsibility. It's baked into their whole approach. They don't mess around.
Okay, so it's not like some countries where there are all these loopholes, right? Like, what about automatic weapons? Those are a big no-no, I'm guessing.
You're spot on. Totally banned for civilians. We're talking machine guns, automatic rifles. Anything designed for that kind of rapid fire is a hard no.
Makes sense. But what about high-capacity magazines? That seems to be a sticking point everywhere.
Even those are really controlled. For rifles, anything over 10 rounds is considered high capacity. And for handguns, it's 20.
Wow, that's stricter than I expected.
Yeah, it shows you they're serious about limiting the potential damage if something does happen. It's about minimizing risk.
But I did read something interesting.
Hmm,
You can get special permits for those larger magazines.
that's right. But there's a big but there. You gotta have a really good reason. Competition shooting, for example. And even then, you gotta prove you're responsible. You know what you're doing with that kind of equipment.
So it's like they've thought of everything, trying to find that balance, right?
Yeah.
Individual needs versus public safety.
Exactly. It's a very different way of thinking about it. No, you can't really talk about Finnish gun laws without understanding their history, their culture.
Hmm.
It's all tied in.
You're talking about the Winter War. That's like David and Goliath stuff, right?
Exactly. Finland standing up to the Soviet Union, it's this incredibly powerful part of their identity. It kind of ingrained this idea of self-reliance,
Like they always got to be ready to defend themselves, just in case.
Right. So firearms. They're not just about hunting or sport. It's about being prepared if things go south. It's about protecting their freedom, their sovereignty. It's deep.
Okay, that makes their whole permit process make a lot more sense. We skimmed over it before. What does that actually involve? Like, if you want a gun in Finland, what do you have to do?
Buckle up. Think thorough background checks, mental health evaluations, and I mean thorough.
So none of this, I need a gun for self-defense stuff.
Nope, not gonna fly there. They see security as a collective thing. Something the government, the police, the military, they handle that.
Huh, interesting. So they trust their citizens with guns, but they also trust their government to, keep them safe.
It's a different perspective for sure. And it's not just about getting that permit. Once you have a firearm, there are strict rules for storing it.
Okay, so you've got your permit, you've gone through the background checks, the mental health evaluations. It's in a safe, right?
Oh yeah, they are serious about safe storage.
Yeah.
Unloaded in a certified gun safe.
Wait, so that's not all?
Nope. Ammunition.
Yeah.
Different lockup entirely. They are not messing around when it comes to preventing accidents.
Wow, okay, so you've jumped through all the hoops, you've got your gun locked up tight.
Mm-hmm.
What about when you actually want to use it? Like for hunting or going to the range?
Even then, it's not just a free-for-all. For hunting, a lot of times you need to join a hunting association.
Kind of like proving you're not some random person wandering around with a rifle.
It's about accountability. You're answerable to a community that takes this stuff seriously. And sport shooting. You'll likely be part of a shooting club with proof of regular competition. They want to see dedication, not impulsivity.
So everything's got to be above board. Makes sense, given everything else we've talked about. But speaking of, let's say I book a trip to Helsinki and I get the urge to try some target practice. What then?
You might be surprised. Some ranges actually offer a tourist experience. Let you try out some firearms under very controlled conditions, of course.
Seriously. So they're strict with their own citizens, but tourists can just show up and give it a go.
It's more about what comes into the country, bringing your own firearm.
Hmm.
Good luck with that, unless you've got a rock-solid reason and a ton of paperwork. Temporary permits are tough to come by.
Like, you can use what we provide under our supervision, but leave your own baggage at home.
Exactly. It shows you how they balance things. They get that firearms are tools part of their heritage even, but they're serious about keeping them in check.
So far, so good. We've been focusing on the positives. And I gotta ask, Finland's pretty homogenous, right? As countries go. Does that play into how they can have these laws? Like, is there just less pushback?
That's a fair point. Finland does have a high level of social trust, this sense of shared responsibility. That definitely helps, but it's not the whole story.
Because they do have some diversity, even if it's not on the same scale as other places.
Exactly. And it's important to note that they've tried to be inclusive in their laws. For example, the Sami people up north, reindeer hunting. That's a huge part of their culture.
Okay, so how does that work with Finland's overall gun regulations?
They've actually integrated those traditions into the system. The Sami have their own customs and practices around firearms. Some even predate modern Finnish law, and they respect that. It's a balancing act for sure, but it seems to be working.
It's not just about forcing everyone into the same box, but recognizing that different communities might have different needs, different traditions. That's really interesting.
It's a very pragmatic approach. They're willing to adapt and change their laws based on new information or new situations.
Now that is interesting. But it makes me wonder, if another country, maybe a much more diverse one, wanted to do something similar, could they use Finland as a model? Or is it just too different?
You can't really just copy and paste something this complex, especially with social issues. But Finland gives us a case study, something to think about. There are principles there that could be adapted.
So it's less, here's the exact recipe, and more, here's some ingredients to consider.
Exactly. Because the really interesting thing about Finland isn't just the laws themselves, it's the whole mindset. This idea of trust responsibility, this understanding that owning a firearm is a privilege, not a right.
Which, to be honest, is a pretty different way of looking at it compared to, say, the United States.
It is, but it's not about saying one is right and one is wrong. It's about understanding that different cultures, well, they have different relationships with firearms. Their history, their values, their experiences, it all plays a role.
Makes you wonder, though, if those values can change over time, or if certain events, even tragic ones, could shift how a society sees things.
It's a complicated question. What we do know is that Finland has created a system where guns are relatively common, but gun violence is really low.
And that's what's so fascinating about it, right? It's not just about the guns themselves. It's about creating a culture of responsibility.
Exactly. It takes education training and a willingness to have those tough conversations about what role firearms should have in society, which brings us back to why these deep dives are so important.
For sure.
Yeah.
The more we understand about different approaches, what works, what doesn't, the better we can talk about these things.
I couldn't agree more. And while we focus on the positives, no system is perfect.
Right. Even in Finland, there are going to be people on both sides of the issue.
Of course. Some will say the laws are too strict. Others will say they're not strict enough. But the point is, they're having those discussions with a certain level of respect for each other, with this shared goal of keeping people safe.
So maybe that's another lesson here. It's not just the laws. It's how you talk about them, how you put them into practice. Always trying to find that balance. It's kind of like they've figured out how to have these really tough conversations, but without, like, the shouting matches. More like, okay, how do we make this work? It's refreshing.
It really is. And it goes back to what we were saying about their pragmatic approach. They're always looking for ways to improve, to fine-tune things.
So it's not about digging in and saying, my way or the highway. It's what's working, what's not, and how can we do better?
Exactly. That willingness to keep learning is huge. We've talked a lot about what other countries can learn from Finland, but it goes both ways, right?
Right.
What about what Finland can learn from others?
Oh, interesting. Even if you're doing well, there's always room to grow. What do you think? What could they pick up from seeing how other countries handle things?
Well, one area that comes to mind is the whole mental health aspect. They do have those evaluations, but there's always more to learn.
Looking at other countries' best practices, maybe even seeing where their own system could be strengthened.
Right. Different intervention models, early detection programs, even community-based stuff. Because even one tragedy is too many.
That's for sure. It reminds you that this is an ongoing thing, always learning and adapting, trying to make things safer.
Absolutely. And who knows, maybe Finland could even become like a global leader in this area.
Instead of just land of 1,000 lakes, it's Finland, where gun sense prevails.
I like it. But seriously, there's a lot that other countries can take away from their approach.
It really highlights how much context matters.
For sure. What works somewhere else might not work exactly the same way here, but there are these universal principles at play.
Yeah, the training, the education, being sensitive to different cultures, that's huge.
And the biggest takeaway, Finland shows that you can have a society with a lot of guns, but very little gun violence. It's possible.
That's a powerful message. There's hope. If they can do it, maybe others can too.
Exactly. Sometimes the answers come from the places you least expect. Who'd have thought we'd be looking to Finland for this?
It just goes to show you never know where a deep dive will take you. Sometimes the most surprising journeys lead to the most important discoveries.
Well said. Well, that about wraps up our Finnish firearms deep dive. Any final thoughts for our listeners?
Always. Let's leave them with this. If Finland can create this kind of culture around firearms with their history, their traditions, what does that tell us about the possibility for change in other parts of the world?
Now, that's a question worth thinking about. Maybe it means that even the toughest problems can be solved if we're willing to learn from each other and keep an open mind.
Because sometimes the most unexpected paths lead to the most amazing places. That's all the time we have for today, folks. Until next time, stay curious.